Hey everybody, I'm Magni. I'm a warlord in the game of Amtgard, playing in the Kingdom of Crystal Groves, and welcome back to my series on running tournaments. This is the second installment of my three-part series, with my first video being on tournament styles. So this is like the different types of tournaments that you can run. If you haven't seen that video, you can find it in the description below. Some of the concepts in terms of tournament styles will be referenced within this video. So if you're not super familiar, I highly recommend checking that video out. So go ahead and watch it if you haven't seen it. But today's video is on really the setup and the different things that you need to consider when running a tournament. This is going to be really the meat and bones in terms of tournament organization and tournament running. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. So in terms of tournament setup, there's really not that many things that you need to figure out. It can all be summarized within these 6 different points. Um, and it's pretty straightforward, but not every decision is necessarily trivial. So let's go through these point by point. So first off, we have styles. I would say this is the biggest thing or the biggest decision that you're gonna have to decide on, right? And so I devoted a whole video to this, right? You can find it in the description below if you haven't seen it. And so depending on what sort of style you choose, that's going to dictate a lot of different things in how the tournament is going to be ran, right? So, for example, if you choose brackets or to run a brackets tournament or a pools into brackets tournament, you have to make some unique decisions. So, for example, when it comes to brackets, you have to determine the elimination factor, right? So there's typically 2 different conditions. You can do a single elimination or a double elimination, right? And so this is really the number of losses a given participant can have before they're kicked out of the bracket. If you do a single elimination bracket, the way the brackets are held is that there's 2 sides and they meet up together. Alternatively, if you do a double elimination bracket, you have a winner's bracket and a loser's bracket. If you lose in the winner's bracket, you go to the loser's bracket. And then the winner from each bracket fight each other. Those are really the 2 different ways to do the elimination criteria. Additionally, when looking at brackets, you need to consider the condition for a match win, right? So this is the number of wins that you need to get, right? So are you going to do a best 2 out of 3? That's kind of the fastest way to do it, and most traditional for your early fights within a bracket. And then alternatively, you can do higher ratios. So best 3 out of 5, best 5 out of 7, so on and so forth. Typically, within brackets, you do best 2 out of 3, and then in your semifinals and your finals, runners will do best 3 out of 5. That's it just helps the tournament go faster that way. Finally, the last thing you need to do is determining your seating condition. I talk about this in my first video, so if you're not familiar with the different ways to do seating, go ahead and check that out. Alternatively, when you're running pools, so your bear pits or Ironmans, or even when you're running grand melees, the main thing that you need to consider when running those tournaments or those styles is the time limit that you're going to do for a given category. For pools into brackets, the bear pit section typically runs about 15 minutes. That's a pretty decent time to get your seating, or to get like a sufficient number of kills and get people warmed up. Whereas if you're running a full tournament that is just pure bear pits or like a grand melee, you need to use longer time spans. If you're doing multiple categories, I'd suggest anywhere between 30 minutes and an hour per category. Whereas if you're going to do one long category, a singular category like such as open, I fought in grand melee or bear pits that run for 2 to 4 hours. Um, so something that you just need to consider in uh, how you're going to run that. Next up, you have the number of categories that you're going to run within a given tournament, right? For that style. So typically, tournaments have four main styles. You have single short. You then have Florentine, so two short swords. Then you have sword and board, which is a short sword and up to a medium shield. And then you have full open, so any equipment category. So those are the four main categories that are used within tournaments. And then sometimes, depending on who the game runner is, or the tournament runner, or even in regionally where you're at, a great weapon may or may not be included. So those aren't the only categories that you can do, but those are the 4 to 5 main ones. And depending on how much time you want to devote to running this tournament, right, you can change the number of categories. Typically, if you do a 5 category tournament, it is a lot of time and a lot of work for everybody. Moving on, you have the decision to use a ring versus no ring. This is applicable for whatever style you use. I would say besides Grand Melee. Um, and the reason being is because Grand Melee is kind of like chaotic and everybody's just doing whatever or fighting their singles, whereas in all the other categories or all the other styles, sorry, you have a set fight location, right? So when you determine whether or not to use a ring, um, this this adds additional restrictions on the fight style. So if you choose to have a ring, which I recommend all tournament setups to have rings, just to make things more well defined, you have to decide whether or not the ring has a hard boundary or a soft boundary. And so what I mean by this is, so this is our given ring. Typically rings are anywhere between 20 to 40 foot in diameter. You can make them smaller, but it becomes a little bit too crowded that way. But if you have a hard boundary, as I was saying, if you step outside of that boundary, it's the edge of the world and the fighter dies immediately. Alternatively, you can have a soft boundary where there is the boundary to you step over, and the reeve can tell you, all right, you need to step back in. If you step out again, that's a death, or there's like a warning zone, and then another foot outside of this boundary, then you die. Those are two different ways that I've seen soft boundaries. I much prefer hard boundaries because if you're going to implement a boundary, you might as well use it to the full extent. Um, and then lastly, you also need to consider ring size, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. Um, 25 feet in diameter is plenty of room, in my opinion. Um, I wouldn't recommend going anything under 15 feet, uh, just because then, it gets really crowded. And I wouldn't go over 40 foot. That's really a massive ring, in my opinion. But, people can do what they want. Another reason, I guess, really briefly on why I would recommend having rings is if you don't have a ring, it can make it difficult for some fights in a case where if you have a very, very defensive set of fighters where they just back up and back up and back up, you can end up having fighters chase people across the field. I've seen this, and I've also had to do it to people, and it becomes annoying for the opposing fighters as well as for the reeves. So just things to consider when running tournaments on restricting the field of space that people can occupy. Then moving on, you also have to consider the point breakdown for each category, right? So in a standard 4 category tournament, right, the winners of categories are awarded points, and then whoever has the most points at the end wins. Most traditionally, the point breakdown is this breakdown here, where first place within a given category earns 5 points. Then it goes 3 points, 2 points, and 1 point. I've even seen breakdowns where like 5th and 6th get half points. It's really up to how gracious the reeves want to be. I've even seen it to where all people in brackets get a half point. It's not necessarily right. It's not necessarily wrong. It's a way to do it. Typically, when you have this gap here between first and second, it's the point of doing this is so you highly reward the people that get first, right? So then really if you want to be able to beat out anybody else in other categories, it really forces you to get first, so you can strategically plan a win. You can also just have it go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's really up to you, but this is what I've seen the most common in terms of point breakdown. And then finally, the last thing, and I would say one of the most important things by far, is your acquisition of reeves. If you don't have reeves, you don't have a tournament. So it's like quite as simple as that. Make sure that you look out for reeves at the time of setting up the tournament, or at the time that you're organizing the tournament, and try to do this within a couple months in advance, so you make sure you have, your referees. I strongly suggest having 2 to 4 reeves in backup, just so in the event that something comes up, whether it be real life or people just decide to not go, you have people there that are able to step in and read for you. It's really unfortunate if you have to reduce the size of a tournament or even cancel a tournament because you don't have any reeves. So just keep an eye out and pay special attention to your reeves. They are a very valuable asset. Moving on, from the main things that you need to pin down in organizing a tournament, I also have this list of things to consider when running tournaments. These are more like finer grained details and things that you can decide on the day of, and sort of like my tips and tricks. So the most important thing that I would say in terms of considering how to run a tournament is always keep it simple. The easier it is for you to decide, or the easier it is and the more well organized it is of a tournament, the easier it will be to run. Most often when tournament fighters are entering a tournament, they don't want to be bombarded by a whole bunch of rules and complex thoughts. They're there to focus on fighting. So the easier you make it on them, the easier they'll make it on you. Additionally, when moving through the tournament, you have a couple of other things that you need to think about. You also kind of need to decide on how you define streaks. This is specifically for brackets. The reason why I say this is I've seen it done a couple of ways, and people can get upset when they find out about this on the day of. So when defining brackets, there's really two different ways, right? So this person here is in a match, and um, they fight their other opponent, and the red person wins, and then that will count as a single kill in their streak. Then they win their second match, and then that's their second streak, and then they win the final, and then that's their third streak. I've seen it that way, but additionally, I've seen it to where, and I've been involved in tournaments in this case, where your individual fights within a match count towards streaking, right? So if you're doing best 2 out of 3, um, you have, say you win 2-0, that's a 2 streak, and then you go here and you win 2-0 again, that's a 4 streak. But in any case of these matches, say you lose one, your streak's broken. I would say there's pros and cons to the way it's done. I'm not going to argue on which way is better, which way is worse. But I will say that this way, where each individual match counts towards the streak, is what I've seen the most. Additionally, moving forward, you also need to consider, in the event of a tie, how to do the tiebreaker. You can consider the streaks that were attained in pools, or whoever had the longest streak overall within brackets. You can also have the two tied players do a round robin, or of their choice, fight it out. I've even seen fighters do rock paper scissors for the final first place position. It's really up to you, but it's nice to think about it ahead of time, just so you're not caught flat-footed. Talking about being caught flat-footed, it's very nice to also have a plan in the event of inclement weather. Whether it's a rainstorm, a hurricane, a snowstorm. Now that it's starting to become winter, having plans in place is really nice. I've been in tournaments where there isn't really an inclement weather plan, but there's no plan to move the tournament, so we are fighting in the pouring rain. It sucks, but that's what it is. Just think about it, and obviously keep in your mind the safety of your players and the safety of your reeves and your staff when deciding an inclement weather plan. And if the weather is bad enough, I would suggest moving the tournament if you have the capacity to. Additionally, thinking about, ahead of time, thinking about your tournament, I highly suggest considering how you're going to do marketing, right? You want your tournament to be a positive turnout. So what are ways that you can improve that? I suggest, getting awards and acquiring awards for your tournament. People like swag. So this could be as simple as a belt favor. It could be an iron-on. It could be macrame, or not macrame, applique. There you go. You can get trophies, medals, whatever. People like things. So having fancy stuff for the winners is a great way to do that. Additionally, you need to then think about, ways to advertise. You can advertise very easily now, since most Amtgard groups are on Facebook. Just doing, just kind of spamming the notifications, doing discussion posts, doing constant reminders. You can also work with your kingdom monarchies, your local parks, to continue to spread the word out. You can also think about trying to work with local artisans to, do advertisements for you. If you can get them to get something out of it as well as you, it's a mutually beneficial relationship in that case. And also in terms of marketing, think about your date selection. Obviously, don't choose dates that are like right next to a holiday, but also try to choose dates that are well in advance. Don't try to set up a kingdom level tournament the next day or like the weekend of, because people aren't going to be able to show up because most people are busy, including myself. I would suggest having anywhere between 1 to 2 months in advance. Even if you go all the way out to planning out all of the tournaments at the beginning of a reign, is not a bad idea. Um, if the dates are there well in advance, then I would say nobody can really complain that they weren't told about it because the information was already set. Um, Assuming that it is easily accessible for everybody. And then finally, the last thing that you should consider is the tournament size, right? Or like the number of participants that you want to have within your tournament. Um, Ideally, for like a kingdom level tournament, you have anywhere between 20 to 50 fighters. When you think about having inter kingdom tournaments, you're probably looking at anywhere between 50 to 200 or more fighters. Um, those are big numbers, whereas when you're planning for like a local park, anywhere between 5 to 15 or even 20 if you have like a huge duchy or a grand duchy. Um, Determining the size of tournament or guesstimating the size of tournament that you're going to run will help inform a lot of these considerations, as well as the main setup, right? So if you're going to do an inter kingdom tournament, you're not going to be running a round robin. You're probably going to be running, a pools into bracket format instead. Um, Again, this isn't a full list of considerations that you need to have. There's no way that I'm going to be able to like list everything out. But I would say these are again like the broad strokes. Um, and most of your other, um, day of considerations or day of decisions that you need to make, uh, you should pretty easily be able to figure it out based off of common sense or ask, your more experienced event runners that are available to you. So that's all I have for this video. Hopefully everybody was able to find something useful here. Thank you all for sticking with it to this point. I really appreciate your views. If you have any comments, wisdom, thoughts that you want to share, go ahead and put them down below in the comments. This is, again, the second video in my 3-part series. My next video is on sort of my thoughts on how to keep tournaments fun and fresh and really trying to stop them from being stale. So keep an eye out for that video. And thank you all for being here, and I'll talk to you later. That's all, folks.